Okay, so this is about adults, vulnerable adults. Now, this is significantly different. This is also duties that have emerged in the 20th century within local authorities. So we did not know before the 20th century that we would need these. These are brand new. And I think I mentioned in the children's playlist that actually our legislation around vulnerable adults is a much slower growing thing, because with children, the state can absolutely say that with people, young people who are kind of under 18, that we should intervene when power dynamics are bad or where somebody's coming to harm. But actually, adults are allowed to harm themselves. Adults are allowed to make piss poor decisions. Adults are, adults may be vulnerable, but they also have capacity and they have autonomy and they have rights. And so often, even when an adult is vulnerable, it's not appropriate for the law to intervene. It's actually just not appropriate, because it would actually be a gross abuse of state power. So this has been very, very slow growing law. Now, when I'm talking about vulnerable adults, I'm going to give you a list. So this is the legal frameworks that I could cover, but I'm not going to, because you'd be here for fucking ever. And before I go on, I must say that outside doing occasional advocacy for social care users, which I still do on the odd time, social care is not my speciality, and it's a very complex speciality of its own. Working with adults is a very different skill set to working with children and young people, and it's a very different set of considerations. So I am not in any way an expert on this, but I do understand the relationship of work with vulnerable adults, to the frameworks that I'm talking about, and I have some understanding. So please take that into account. Don't go... In fact, take that as read with all these videos. I am one person. This is my opinion. Do you know what I mean? So if the one thing I do know is how limited my perspective and how little I know. Do you know what I mean? So I am not infallible, in fact, with all these videos. But if I was to cover all the different aspects of law that were contained for vulnerable adults, I would be looking at community care legislation. Now, community care legislation is really interesting because that's a direct application of market-based rationale to these systems when we didn't know what they were in the 90s, which has actually resulted in the privatisation mess that we see now. To put it bluntly, I would say you can root it back to the Community Care Act. Mental health. Now, mental health is not like physical health, because with mental health, the reason we have to have law specifically to mental health is because, one, you're dealing with adults, often with disordered thinking, and what mental health legislation is about, it's about deciding the point of intervention. So it's about the point at which you are causing risk to yourself, to others, and your autonomy can be taken away. And these are very grave decisions. And this is and the reason, one of the things that the TERF thing has brought up is the issue of women in mental health wards, and the history of women in mental health wards and their abuse within that system is just utterly heartbreaking. Particularly the history of sexual assault and sexual abuse. And adult mental health needs, there's a very distinct split. Like, I'm really sorry, I'm going to offend a million people with this, but the gender split within mental health is that women are manifesting mental health conditions that are related to poverty, abuse, sexual abuse that has been done to them. Male mental health conditions are much more linked to aggression and harm to others. This is a very distinct split. This is a very, very distinct split. Mental capacity. Now, mental capacity is the legislation that is most important here. And Dame Butler-Sloss, who wrote the Children's Act, is responsible for one of the most significant judgments in mental capacity legislation ever, which was the Bournemouth Gap. And that's because of the power dynamics that we're discussing. Butler-Sloss is excellent with power dynamics. She understands power dynamics and law. And mental capacity is at the core of these systems, because it's actually trying to figure out when we should undermine an adult's autonomy in their own interests. And this is a terrifyingly complex area. Adult protection. Adult protection is underdeveloped. It's, The protective services that are most often used for adults are actually domestic abuse refuges, which women campaign for and built themselves, and which are contained within local authorities through commissioning often. But actually are not part of, they sit outside the statutory systems because often they are at odds with the statutory system. So often the mother having rights as a person places her, you know, in a situation where actually she's not working with the local authority are working against her. That happens often. And so we understand this tension between domestic abuse services and statutory authorities. So it works quite well that it used to work quite well, maybe it didn't. But these systems are systems that women fought and built themselves that exist outside, but then the existence of these systems has meant that the law can then develop to include a duty to protect your children from abuse. So they're linked, but they're separate, and they have to be. Criminal justice. I don't deal with a lot. Like most of the criminal justice stuff that I've done is youth justice. I don't have huge amounts of expertise on adult. Welfare and homelessness, which again links to children. And this is where there is overlap, and asylum, which I'm not going to look at because it's a fucking mess. But these systems they've developed at different rates, they develop to very different pressures, but they cover the very most vulnerable people. So I'm going to give you a few case studies once this videos are done. Now, it's here that we see the tension of all these different forces in relief. So I've talked about the fact that care labour can't be abdicated, that it's linked to the family, that abdication is crisis related to abuse and neglect. But the other thing about care labour, and it concerns childcare and elder care and care of very vulnerable people, is it's mostly done by women, but it requires that economists understand something that they currently do not get because they use these theoretical models. And what Thomas Piketty identified in Capital in the 20th century in the 21st century was that the family is a means by which inequality produces, but he failed to mention that means it's a stable institution. And the care economy has the family at the centre, and it's about a thing called intergenerational reciprocity. So that's the bonds between generation, which is not just about money. It's not just about money. It's about a multi-directional transfer of time and money transfers throughout the lifespan between generations within families, which the care economy is central to. So the formal care economy, which has been contained within local authorities, has emerged as a direct consequence of the changes women made, because this is stuff that used to be contained within the family unit. And so the care economy is now essential to our economic functioning, our labour market functioning, women's participation in the market economy. Because labour can't be abdicated, there is a direct relationship. This is how we know it's a stabiliser. Because if people can't outsource care labour, they have to do it. There's no gap. We'll just leave that person to not need care. So this is a direct stabiliser and a direct relationship, which is why these systems are a direct reflection of the market economy and can't be measured unless you measure them as a reflection of the market economy. And because of that, this is where our local authorities link the market economy, the paid and unpaid spheres, the family, the state, the market economy. And it's this intersection of institutions which, if you read Minsky, you will see that we should understand. But if you look at modern economics, they do not have capacity. And because of the changes in lifespan and birth rate that have resulted, we have an aged population, we are having less children. I only have 1 child, I should have had 3. You know, we don't have the fertility issues that other countries have, but certainly, you know, if women would have 3 children, that would be fucking excellent for our tomorrow's care needs. But women can't have 3 children, because if they have 3 children, they're fucking fucked. Do you know what I mean? They've got no support for themselves unless they've got a male partner. So, but these things require a fundamental change at elite level. All those disciplines at the LSE have to go for us to do this. And it's going to be crisis, shocks and tremors that do that. And that's going to happen. I'm not saying that we have to campaign for that to happen. That's now going to happen. We've left it too late to do it voluntarily. That's now happening. And part of that is in local authorities. Now, previously, because we couldn't do anything really, if I'm honest, until local authorities failed, which they are. And now that understanding has to get to a central level, which will happen over the next few years. So I'm going to move on to the next video.